In March 1941, at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California, Edward Nelson stood beneath the hull of a submarine, his welding torch flickering in the dim light of the construction bay, sweat soaking through his shirt, his hands blistered from hours of labor, and his frustration mounting. As an 11-a-day welder, Nelson wasn't a decision-maker, but he was a man who paid attention. That day, watching a dozen men waste an entire shift installing a single section of wooden deck planking using a slow, archaic method involving bolts, nuts, and massive scaffolding structures that consumed time, space, and manpower, he shook his head and muttered, "There has to be a better way." For decades, Navy ships used wooden decks for reasons of traction, insulation, and repairability, but the method of installing those decks, drilling, countersinking, threading bolts from above, then twisting nuts from below, was a staggering waste of resources, especially with the ominous clouds of war gathering in the Pacific. Nelson, 36 years old and born in California, had spent over 15 years working in machine shops, studying metal, electricity, and systems. What frustrated him wasn't just the back-breaking inefficiency, it was knowing he already had a solution, one he had refined in his mind over months of observation and welding. His idea was elegant. Instead of bolting from above and threading nuts from below, why not weld threaded studs directly to the steel frame, eliminating the need for scaffolding and cramped coordination? He envisioned a tool, a spring-loaded welding gun with a ceramic flux cap at the end of each stud to hold the flux in place regardless of welding position. This innovation would allow for clean, strong welds from above in under a second per stud, completely transforming the process. But when Nelson brought the idea to his Navy supervisors, they dismissed it out of hand. "We have established procedures," one said. "Stick to your assignments." The chief welding engineer, a civilian named Hartwell, was no more supportive. If it were that easy, someone would have done it already. Nelson tried once more, submitting a formal proposal through official channels to the shipyard commander, Captain Thomas Withers. 3 weeks later, he received a form letter politely thanking him and explaining that such suggestions typically took 18 to 24 months to evaluate. Nelson knew America didn't have 24 months, so he made a decision that would change his life and naval history. That night, in the garage behind his small Vallejo home, Nelson began building his invention himself. His wife, Emma, warned him, "Ted, you're going to get yourself fired." But Nelson simply replied, "This will help the Navy. They just don't know it yet." Over weeks of evening and weekend work, he crafted a crude but functional prototype, a pistol-grip welding gun with a spring-loaded plunger, a trigger, and a ceramic flux cap that held the welding compound in place. By May 1941, the device worked flawlessly on vertical, horizontal, and overhead surfaces. Welds took less than 1 second, required no scaffolding, and were stronger than bolted connections. During a lunch break, Nelson showed it to a few fellow welders at the yard. They were stunned. "You need to show this to Morrison again," one said. "Start your own company," another advised. That idea hadn't occurred to Nelson. He wasn't a businessman, but with no path inside the Navy, he took a leap. He quit. On June 20th, 1941, Nelson handed in his resignation. When his supervisor warned him not to throw away a steady job for a pipe dream, Nelson replied, "When the Navy comes back asking to buy them, I hope you remember this conversation." He founded the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation on July 1st and borrowed $95,000 from the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, setting up shop in a small workshop in Vallejo. He began building welding guns and studs himself. Sales were slow at first. Some shops were curious, but few took risks. Then, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Everything changed. America was at war. Shipbuilding became a national emergency. Yards across the country ramped into overdrive, and suddenly, everyone needed what Nelson had. Orders flooded in. Kaiser Shipyards ordered 50 guns. Bethlehem Steel ordered 40. Even Mare Island, where his idea had been rejected, placed an order for 60 guns and 20,000 studs. Nelson's small workshop couldn't keep up. He leased a larger facility in San Leandro. By early 1942, he had dozens of workers. By the end of the year, hundreds. Submarine deck installation times dropped from 6 days to 1. Scaffolding wasn't needed. Fewer men were required. The Navy's Bureau of Ships took notice. By November 1942, they estimated Nelson's invention had saved over 5 million man-hours. When a delegation of Navy officers visited Nelson's plant to deliver an official citation, the lead officer told him, "Sometimes the best way to serve your country is to ignore official channels and just solve the problem." Nelson was vindicated. Over the next 2 years, his company exploded in scale and influence. Stud welding spread to every major naval shipyard on the West Coast, and soon across the country. The Kaiser yards, Bethlehem, Electric Boat, and others incorporated stud welding not just for decking, but for cable supports, equipment mounts, and hundreds of other shipboard applications. By 1943, Nelson employed over 400 workers and generated $4 million in annual revenue. Every Essex-class aircraft carrier, every Iowa-class battleship, every Liberty ship, 2,010 of them, used Nelson's studs. Each one had up to 8,000 attachments. The time savings were staggering. At the height of production in 1943, American shipyards were launching 3 new ships every day. That pace would have been impossible without innovations like Nelson's. The Navy awarded his company the Army-Navy E Award for Excellence in Production in 1943, and again with stars in 1944. His contribution had saved an estimated 50 million man-hours, equivalent to 5,700 years of labor. That's one person working 8 hours a day, every day, for nearly 20,000 years. But Nelson's impact wasn't just measured in hours, it was measured in lives. Ships completed faster meant more submarines hunting Japanese convoys, more carriers launching airstrikes, more landing ships ready for D-Day. And Nelson's invention came at a time when America desperately needed more workers. As men went off to war, women entered the workforce in massive numbers. Stud welding was ideal. It was easy to learn, safe to operate, and highly efficient. At Mare Island, over 9,000 women joined the effort. Nelson's guns became the tools of both Rosie the Riveter and Wendy the Welder. His invention made their success possible. When the war ended in August 1945, the shipyards scaled back. Contracts dried up. But Nelson was ready. He pivoted to civilian applications: steel buildings, bridges, construction, automotive manufacturing. The post-war boom created huge demand for welding innovation, and Nelson's company adapted. In 1950, he sold the company to TRW, securing financial stability, but his name stayed on every gun. Through decades and corporate changes, the Nelson brand endured. Today, Nelson stud welding is used globally in skyscrapers, nuclear plants, car factories, and even in the restoration of historic ships like the battleship Texas and the submarine Pampanito. Volunteers preserving these relics still use Nelson equipment, modern versions of what he built in his garage in 1941. Ted Nelson lived until 1994. He died at age 89, having seen his invention change industries, save lives, and shape history. There's no statue of him at Mare Island, no prominent museum display. His story is largely forgotten, known mostly to welding professionals and shipbuilding historians. But Nelson probably wouldn't have minded. He didn't seek fame. He sought function. He saw a problem, solved it, and stuck to the work. And that's what makes his legacy so powerful. Because the story of Ted Nelson isn't just about welding. It's about the spirit of innovation. How one person with a simple idea, the courage to challenge authority, and the willingness to act can change the course of history. In a world full of experts, bureaucracy, and red tape, Nelson reminds us that breakthroughs often come from the fringes, from people no one expects, doing jobs others overlook. His ceramic flux cap was just a small piece of material. his gun, a humble tool. But together, they helped shorten the war, saved tens of millions of hours, empowered a new workforce, and built a legacy that endures 80 years later. The next great innovation might come from another welder, mechanic, teacher, nurse, or factory worker. Someone outside the system. Someone the system refuses to hear. So the question is, when you see something broken, will you wait for permission? Or will you build the solution yourself? Ted Nelson didn't ask. He just welded. If you made it this far, then maybe, just maybe, you're someone who sees the world not just as it is, but as it could be. Ted Nelson wasn't a general, a CEO, or a PhD. He was a welder who refused to accept inefficiency. He didn't wait for permission. He built the solution. His story isn't just about World War II or welding. It's about what happens when one person dares to challenge the status quo. So here's your moment. If this story inspired you, share it. Hit the like button, drop a comment below telling us what you think is broken and what you're doing to fix it. And if you want more stories about unsung heroes who quietly changed history, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next Ted Nelson might be watching this video. Or they might